My poem is entitled Music Flowed from Pharaoh's Soul.
Give me strength, give me faith, think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us all. Think about the one who made us all.
A new dream, a new scene. Think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us all. A new day, a new way. Think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us all. Think about the one who made us all.
I love you. You love me. Think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us all. Think about the one who made us all.
Our Creator made us all. On this new day, He gives us strength. On this new day, He brings us faith and love.
Think about the one
and love.
Think about the one.
Thank you, Lord.
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 Think about the one. From Pharaoh's saxophone, music is divine. That flowed from the windows of his mind. The musical essence lights the way, encouraging love and harmony. From Pharaoh's heart, spiritual love flowed to you. From Pharaoh's soul, universal love flowed for humankind. From Pharaoh's heart, spiritual love flowed to you. From his soul, universal love flowed for humankind. He brought many spiritual compositions into fruition with lyrics rich and profound. Listen and hear how they unfold. Pharaoh's musical creations spoke to the people. From his heart to the core of his being, his music freed people's imagination to elevate. Now, Pharaoh's ascended spirit freely consoles. From Pharaoh's heart, spiritual love flowed to you. From his soul, universal love flowed for humankind. From Pharaoh's heart, spiritual love flowed to you. From his soul, universal love flowed for humankind.
Give me strength, give me faith, Think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us all. Think about the one who made us all.
I love you. You love me.
Me.
Think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us all. Think about the one who made us all.
A new dream. A new scene. Think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us all. Think about the one who made us all.
A new day, a new way. Think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us all.
Think about the one who made us. Our Creator made us all. On this new day, He gives us strength. On this new day, He brings us peace and love.
Think about the one.
Brings us love.
Think about the one.
Thank you, Lord.
Think about the one.
For your love.
Think about the one.
Thank you, Lord.
Think about the one.
For your love.
Think about the one.
I won't forget you, Lord.
Think about the one.
Won't forget you, Lord.
Think about the one.
No, won't forget you, Lord.
Think about the one.
Do-do ba ba da ba ba da da da. Do-do ba ba da ba ba da da da. Do-do ba ba da ba ba da da.
Do-do ba ba da ba ba da da.
So next, Minister Imhotep to introduce our speaker today.
I'm very happy to have my, he's my Seba. And Dr. Asa Hilliard told us a long time ago that a Seba is a star, and a Seba is a doorway, and a Seba is a teacher, and a teacher is a doorway. He has provided a doorway for so many of us in the African community. He is a warrior scholar. He's a renowned public speaker. He's a professor, workshop leader, author, leader, organizer, visionary of exceptional influence who addresses audiences in the United States, Britain, France, Rotterdam, and Africa. For 38 years, Dr. Obashaka was a professor at San Francisco State University, where he is now Professor Emeritus. He has published newspapers. He has led organizations. He's been an activist, a courageous activist. He's an organic scholar. He's done so many things. And as I'm reading his bio, my notes are stuck. The thing won't move anymore. I'm very sorry. I had so much to say about him. I just want to say that Dr. Obashaka, oh, here it is. It's moving now. All right. So look at this. He's marched with Dr. King in Selma in 1965. He's addressed people at the Million Man March in 1995. He has written 5 books: The Integration Trap, The Generation Gap, The Art of Leadership, Volume 1, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, Political Legacy of Malcolm X and the art of leadership. Dr. Obashaka is a rare blend of master scholar, master warrior, and charismatic speaker whose many years of organization and scholarship has provided a rich body of experience for writing and teaching and public speaking, and master organizer. Sisters and brothers, I want to introduce a friend, a teacher to the African community in the diaspora, Dr. Obashaka.
OTEP, Jose members, how you all doing? You see next to me the prize and joy of my life, Pamela Shirley Tashaka, who is associated with Jose, and yesterday was out working for the election of Greg Hodge as mayor of Oakland. So I want to just say, Pam, my love. And by the way, part of my organizing work involved going to the United Kingdom in 2005 to address the anniversary of the 5th Pan-African Congress. And I chaired the political committee to the 6th Pan-African Congress in Tanzania in 1974. And so I would stay in the homes of different people throughout the United Kingdom. And the last home I stayed in was a lady sitting next to me. So that's also a sign that there's rewards in life when you do work for our people. So this morning, first of all, I want to say to Minister Imhotep, I'm really proud of you. He's one of my students in the 70s, and he's gone on to be consistent in practicing Ma'at and having a lovely wife and raising a family. And I'm really proud of you, as well as the work of Woze. Many times, as I chaired Black Studies at San Francisco State, when we brought in speakers such as Ivan Van Sertima, who wrote the classic work, They Came Before Columbus, John Henry Clark, who I apprenticed under, and Asa Hilliard, who was my buddy. They had a condition. When they spoke at state, they had to speak in the community. And generally the place that I bring them was Woze Community Church. And I remember on one occasion when we had Ivan Van Sertima out, we were driving to Woze, and I asked him, what was the secret to the beauty of his work? They Came Before Columbus, because it reads like a novel. And he said, I wrote history like a novel. And so I say that to say that the work I'm finishing now, my 6th and 7th books on SEVA, which is a replacement system for teaching, the method I'm using is Ivan Van Sertima's. I'm telling a story. So I got that in part by taking him to Woze, the way. So my presentation this morning is entitled Piping into God's Mind. This is not going to be your normal intellectual discussion, where I'm going to be quoting from a lot of books, because the book I'm going to be drawing from is a mind of God, who the Dogons call Amma, and who the Kemites call Amun, who the Yorubas call Olodumare, who goes by many names, but all the same. So this is going to be a discussion of the process for thinking God's thoughts or piping into God's mind. And by that, I mean, we all are of God, so God is a part of all of us. God is a light within all of us, which on one level is the soul. On another level is the Ka, which is your destiny, your life path. The Ba, which is the bird with wings with the head of a human being. which is the capacity of the human being to go to the future or the past. And that's all part of the powers of God that lie within each of us. And so in speaking to piping into God's mind, I want to speak from the standpoint of a life experience and the life experience of other African people who in the process of this were able to do what we all do, or many of us, especially Africans, but most human beings, having access to the Creator through our dreams, through our intuition, through our experience of the higher mind that resides within each of us. We know that we are best when we listen to the voice within. And if the voice within tells us not to do something and we do it, we always regret it. And then we say, I wish I hadn't done that. Isn't that true? I know that when the FBI had denied me a job in Marin County, I had just led the San Francisco Freedom Movement for 5 years. And my community felt that I needed a job. I had just got married. It was in 1969. And so Ray Richardson saw that I got a job. And then when it came for the superintendent to see that that continued, I didn't have a teaching credential. So they're going to give me a provisional teaching credential. The FBI filed a 17-page report. That's called COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program. One of the aims of that was to prevent radicals and militants from getting jobs. The other one was from breathing. And 3 times they tried to take my life. So I'm driving to Sacramento because I fight and usually win, and I could win this one because the FBI was saying that they're going to deny me this work because I'd been arrested 18 times, 2 times in the South, the rest in the San Francisco Freedom Movement. So I'm going to hire an attorney, an NAACP attorney, and I knew I'd win this case because these were all misdemeanors. But my spirit said, don't. I'm halfway to Sacramento. So I turn around and come back. 3 years later, the same mother in the Black community, Ray Richardson, and another sister named Nansisi Caillou, were running Black studies indirectly at San Francisco State, and they got me a job at San Francisco State. So I didn't know why the Spirit was telling me not to fight, because I could have won. But the Spirit knew more than I knew. They knew that I could teach at the elementary, junior high, high school level, but that wasn't really the place for me. My message was different, and they knew there was something else for me. I didn't know that. And then when I get at San Francisco State, the FBI is again trying to deny me tenure, and Dr. Asa Hilliard was head of my committee and helped me get tenure. So what I'm saying is, in speaking to piping into God's mind, we all have the mind of God, which is part of the essence of God within us. But when I speak of piping into God's mind, I'm not just speaking of the normal intuitive experience we have, which is extremely important. And if we disconnect from that, then we're going to disconnect from the wisdom that guides us, particularly in times of crisis or in times in which we're uncertain and we need direction. But I'm talking about in piping into God's mind, I'm particularly going to speak about piping into the higher mind. In Kemetic knowledge, they have 3 concepts: Sia, exceptional intellectual clarity; Hu, authoritative utterance; and Heka, which is the power of action, which literally means magic. But most of our scholars who don't want to deal with the Spirit will usually leave that part out, but that's generally what it means. Exceptional intellectual clarity, many have interpreted to mean clear thinking. No, exceptional intellectual clarity is when you pipe into God's mind, because what you're able to see and think then is free of error. And generally, that's a level that it takes years to reach. So when I speak about piping into God's mind, I'm speaking about communing with God's mind, and particularly on higher levels, which is in the realm of what the Dogon calls Sodaya, clear word, or what in our culture we call innovation, which is that realm in which when we pipe into God's mind, we are able to discover new truths. These are truths already there, but not seen before. And this is a universal experience for those at this level, the level of what in this culture is called innovation, which only 2% of any people in any realm reach, 2%. So when Einstein has a dream and Einstein is on a sled going at the speed of light, that dream, along with intuition, gave him the theory of relativity. If we look at George Washington Carver was able to pipe into God's mind through communing with plants, because everything God creates has intelligence. And as a result, was able to come up with more breakthroughs in science than any other scientist in the 20th century, making him the greatest scientist of the 20th century, perhaps the 21st as well, because he combined technical knowledge, which every scientist in every field would have, his in botany and many other fields, Einstein's in quantum physics. But what he was able to do was come up with breakthroughs in so many different areas that helped to advance life and improve life on this earth. So Einstein. And when we look at John Coltrane, who was referred to as one of the influences on Pharoah Sanders, John Coltrane, after undergoing an experience of alcoholism and drug addiction, when he comes off of it, what he's able to do is then pipe into God's mind, in this case, through a dream. And he heard a sound. And that sound was a music that he said sounded like heaven. And that heavenly sound was the basis for a love supreme. John Coltrane, an ordinary musician for most of his life, but who put in 14 hours of work on his music for years, went from ordinary to extraordinary. And so piping into God's mind is the realm of creativity. That realm of creativity is generally blocked through Western education. And so we have a crisis today, and this is the crisis we have to deal with now. Chancellor Williams correctly dealt with the issue of miseducation of the Negro. He said, "For taught the same philosophy, history, psychology of the European, our mind has been put on control." And so then during the era of segregation, if you're under the control of your oppressor, you don't have to be told to go to the back seat. You will go without being told. So that is the issue we have been dealing with up to now, which is an important issue and one that we need to continue because many of our people are still what I call on remote control. Automatic pilot, double O soul, remote control Negroes. Too many of us are still thinking someone else's thoughts and are being programmed to operate without being told to do so. The extreme examples are clear, Clarence Thomas, but there are others in which we do it unconsciously. But many of us have also freed our minds. And so we have undergone a transformation of consciousness, but we are still caught in the trap of their method. Dr. Theophil Obenga makes this observation. He and I talk quite regularly. In fact, if you check out my show, the Dr. Obashaka show, last year we had a conversation that was an extensive conversation and very beautiful on African philosophy, history, and culture. And Dr. Obenga makes this observation. We have a contradiction. We have African-centered thought and a European method for teaching. And we're in trouble because if you're using their method, and even though you think you have the correct information, if you use their method, you end up in the same place. You'll find yourself ending up in the same place. How? If you look at how this project began, it began with Plato and what he had, which he called the form. And the form was taught to him by his teacher, Socrates. Socrates learned this from the Chemites, but Plato distorted it. Socrates said, in the pre-existing state, the soul was able to see the forms, and these were the forms of truth, of justice, of whatever. And these forms were the absolute truths. Now, this was coming from African thought. When Plato got it, he Aryanized it. Aryan is the correct term for the European, meaning Lord and Master. And in this particular case, he despiritualized it. And this is the problem with Aryan or Western education. It is separated spirit from reason. And so how did he do it? He said that the highest level of knowledge comes through the form. And that is what he got from Socrates. And then he does his trick. He separates the forms, each from the other. So truth or justice or male or female. And he leaves out spirit. And he places the form above God. So this is taking God out of the picture, okay? It's a clever despiritualization. And then he said, the form can only be known through reason. And this is what you get in Western education. You get reason minus intuition, reason minus spirit, and reason minus being. Get this one. Because basically, when you're caught into the European or Aryan intellectual trap, knowing is separate from being. So in African-centered thought, if we're going to reconcile this and bring the teachings of Ma'at, for example, in line with how it should actually operate, then it is not simply teaching that it is harmony, truth, justice, right order, which it is. That's important to teach. But how do you teach it? You teach it by teaching that to know the truth, you must be the truth. Being is knowledge, and being the truth requires a transformation of mind, body, and spirit. It requires a sculpting of the person so that they are in line with their soul. So the Aryan approach would be, when they talked about philosophy, their philosophers would say, and Socrates would say this, a philosopher is one who loves the truth. Now, that's true up to a point. Yes, definitely. That's true. And if you really know the ultimate truth, that's God. But the African would say, the Akan would say in particular, the philosopher is one who is wise. Huh? See, it's one thing to know a truth. It's another thing to be a truth. And it's another thing to be wise. That's a process. And that comes through you drawing from the light that is within you and trying your best to align yourself with your inner truths, the outer truths of harmony, truth, justice, right order, but your inner truths, what are those? Your gifts, your desires, what you want to do in life. That's your ka, that's your destiny. And so in applying this to myself, Imhotep met me at San Francisco State in the 70s, and I taught a number of classes, the most important of which was African philosophy. And for maybe 20 years, it was the philosophy of the Dogon. And it was taught through this book, Conversations with Ogo Tameli. This is a little book. It's a couple of 100 pages long. This man here is a master of 3 degrees of knowledge, Ogotameli, who had become blind and who became a master teacher who the Dogon from different parts of Mali would come to converse with and learn from. And this book, Conversations with Ogotameli, was a conversation of 30 days on the Jiriso, Beniso, Boloso, the 3 degrees, Jiriso, forward knowledge, Beniso, sideward knowledge, and Boloso, knowledge from behind, or the backward, W-O-R-D. And so for a good 20 years, when I taught African philosophy, I taught it through Ogotameli. And this is a method that's used in Africa by not teaching it. Because you see, in African teaching methods, it's the same that a John Coltrane learned to master music. They learned it under masters, and it was through a discovery process. And so as the master imparts through example and through teaching, but largely through example, this was John Henry Clark's experience with Arthur Schoenberg, who was his first master. I interviewed John the last 8 months of his life. He's one of the 6 masters that I have in the book on Seva. This is a replacement system for this system that's got us in trouble. Because what it does is, by taking us out of God's mind and thinking God's thoughts, it imprisons us in a method that is despiritualized. And it is a method that is mechanical. And there's nothing wrong with reason. You need reason. You need common sense. You shouldn't do anything that doesn't make sense. But to restrict the mind solely to reason is to deprive it of its most beautiful experience, which is the experience of drawing on the totality of knowledge, a part of which we can draw from, if we're fortunate enough, if God allows us to have an experience where we can think God's thoughts to the point that we can do breakthrough thinking, where we can come up with new innovations to improve the planet. So in teaching Conversations with Ogotameli, this was part of my transformative process, being involved in the Black liberation movement, leading the only successful Black freedom, Black power movement, the San Francisco Freedom Movement. In 1960 through 1965, I underwent an awakening. And I realized in the course of that awakening, I didn't know myself and I didn't know my people. I didn't know my enemy. And so it required me to undergo a transformation of identity. And that's led me, along with Bulanlela Wabogo, to the discovery of the path of transformation or awakening called the 6-fold stages to mental freedom, which on my show, the Dr. Obashaka show, we will be having a webinar for a year, twice a month, a couple hours each time. Sister Fanya, who was a member of WOZE, will be one of those taking people through this, because she went through this and has gone through it over a period of 40 years and said it was one of the most rewarding experiences that she got out of being a part of the Pan-African Peoples Organization. So the transformation of consciousness led me to realize that this Western system of education wasn't just a miseducation system because it was misinformation. It was a methodology that imprisoned you. And so over a course of time of apprenticing under masters, but particularly drawing from the thought of Ogotameli, which is the thought of the Dogon. And I started my excursion into African thought through the Dogon deliberately, because it was one of the few African systems, ancient African systems, still alive at that time, and then later Yoruba, Kemetic, and others. And so in the course of this, the Dogon teaching come through a system called Adunaso, A-D-U-N-O-S-O, A-D-U-N-O-S-O. Aduno means universe. So means word or knowledge. Together, knowledge of the universe. So their teachings come through signs or tables of signs that are called the dunaso because they don't write. It's drawn in the sand. But it is the words of God. And you should note that all of these African systems have this great power. Dr. Wade Nobles and myself, we're into Ifa, the Yoruba system. And one of the great things about Ifa is its divination system, that it's able to see into the future and into the past. We both have the same Babalao, or father of mysteries, which is the same term used for priest in ancient Kemet. And he's a great diviner. And so he is, through his system, is drawing from piping into God's mind to see into the future, in this case, your future. And he's given me so many accurate readings that it's funny, you know? And I know that Dr. Nobles has had the same experience. In fact, I can say I'm alive because of his readings, because he saw some things coming to me that if I didn't correct it, I wouldn't be here. So adunoso are signs that Europeans like to call symbols, but they're really more profound than that. It's the thought of Amma, or the thought of God. So piping into God's mind in the African system is through a system, in this particular case, of symbols. And so Imhotep, when he took my class on African philosophy, we taught by not teaching, because you had to interpret those symbols yourself, the adunoso. And you had to see what it meant to you, to apply it to you. And so for me, that was an over 30-year process of realigning myself with the cosmos, because that's basically, when you pipe into God's mind is a totality of everything, and we'll never get even a small part of that. Einstein thought he was going to get it. No human's going to get it. But within adunoso, the signs are a miniature of the universe, something that the forms of Plato broke with. And so every sign is like we are. We're a miniature universe in the larger universe. If you want to understand God, just look at how God works within you. And astrology is the best system for that. And we've been spookified by that. We've been told that this is devil's work, that this is superstition. And so astronomy is okay. But how do you apply it to yourself? Astrology is based on astronomy. And astrology was discovered by the Kemites, you know? And the Kemites said, for based on a person's time, date, and year of birth, they could tell the course of a person's life, and they could even predict their death. Now, no one in the West knows how to do that. And if I did, I wouldn't want to know. You know, I don't want to know how that's going to happen. But the Kemites were the authority for that. And where does that come from? Herodotus. We quote Herodotus on the Kemites being Black, but we leave that part out. Why do we do that? Again, despiritualization. What good is astronomy if you don't have an application to the human being? You need both. And they've done that in every area. Physics, you need metaphysics, you know, so that you understand how the forces that are in nature are in you and how it works. And when you understand that, you understand there's no separation between you and nature, you and the cosmos. We are one. But in the form, what Plato does is separate man from woman and puts man over woman, and then separates man and woman from nature and puts man over nature. And the Bible does the same thing. It says man was given lordship over woman. God didn't say that. Man is given lordship over the planet. God didn't say that. The planet, nature, is an extension of God. And if you try and exercise lordship over nature, it's like trying to exercise lordship over your mother, except it's Big Mama. You hear me? And so you're seeing the storms, the hurricanes, the earthquakes. All this is happening now. Jacob Carruthers, one of my master teachers, a brother that I love deeply, one of the two best people on ancient Kemet in the world, him and Dr. Theophil Obenga. Dr. Theophil Obenga holds that title now on his own. He described Western science as a mad science, not because science is bad, but the philosophy of science that is about control. Francis Bacon, who's the author of empirical science, nothing wrong with a part of his approach, which is to observe nature. But for what purpose? To control nature. And then he said, to create a new nature. And that's what you're seeing now with, these seeds that aren't really seeds, modified. So that once you put them in the ground, you can no longer plant a normal seed. That's a new nature. Who in the heck would want to do that except someone that's going against nature? So if we're going to free our minds, what we have to do is work on the internal cultivation of ourselves, to clear our mirrors, to polish our mirrors, to try and purify them as much as possible so that we can be open to God's light. But it's only those that aspire to it, because it's only those that want to be the best in whatever they do. I've talked to musicians who have told me, and they're great musicians, they've told me, I've never aspired to be the greatest, because if you get up there, then there are going to be other people who are going to be on your case. You know what I mean? And I don't knock that. So that's your choice. But they were masters. They were improvisers. They have a new sound within an existing school. But if you aspire to be the very best, then, and you've got questions to advance humanity, then that's when piping into God's mind can happen, if you've done the hard work. Some of us do less hard work than others because God gives some of us more gifts. In the case of music, Charlie Parker, as Dizzy Gillespie said, was given gifts. He didn't have to do a lot of work. Didn't take him long, and he was blowing every other saxophone player away. In fact, after they threw a cymbal at him when he was playing in Kansas City, a cymbal indicating that his music was sounding bad, he went into the Ozarks and brought Prez, one of the great, Lester Young, one of the great saxophone players' music, and slowed it down so he could hear exactly how he played. And when he came back with that alto saxophone, he blew all the saxophone players away. So you had musicians throwing their saxophones in the river. You hear me? So he had a gift and didn't have to work hard. But Coltrane had to work hard. I've had to work hard. Anyone that's normally gifted, you got to put out the work. So I want to speak in conclusion on this and piping into God's mind, the greatest experience of my life that came through the trials of weaknesses. Because I think part of, in the case of Coltrane, he was able to get to the point of innovation in music because he was able to overcome the weakness of self-doubt and the weaknesses that then led him to alcoholism and drug addiction. And after 2 weeks of cold turkeying, he sits up in his bed one morning, and his first wife, Naima, she said, "John, what's happened?" He said, "I've heard a music from heaven." And that was a result of him overcoming some weaknesses of self-confidence and overcoming depending on external sources, because a lot of our people have had that. And in my case, mine came from realizing at a certain point that I was strong on the masculine and weak on the feminine. I could see in a battle how to take an opponent out. I've never lost a battle. But when it came to seeing things right in front of me that I should have been able to see, I couldn't see it. And I understood that was because I was weak on the feminine side. And being an astrologer, I understood that in advance. So I went on retreats for 5 years, 3 months a year for 5 years, 15 months of looking at myself, camped out in nature and looked at myself, internal self-cultivation, purifying my mirror. And then after 15 months of work, I started working on something I had never planned to write before. which is return to the African mother principle of male and female equality. I had never planned to write this before, but it was kind of like a completion of my quest, but it was also bigger because I was raising the question of how to build just societies. And so after going through 15 months of work, I started writing on this book. And in the course of that, I was able to pipe into God's mind. And of all the experiences in my life, I had the most beautiful experience of my life, which was when I asked God, because when I was writing this book, I was heavily drawing on the Dogon system for just societies. So I asked God, what did Africa mean when it had created societies of justice? What was it based on? And I saw this beautiful light. God is a white light. When you say the light within you, that is a small speck that's a soul that's within you. And, you know, when we sing the song, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine," that's the light within you. And if we're going to understand our ancestors that withstood enslavement, part of the reason is they lived outside of time because they had this sense of the light that was within them. And their greatest wish was that they be able to be free of the manacles of slavery so that they could express their gifts and make a contribution to humanity, which they were making under enslavement because they created a new African culture and an art form, both of which are the popular cultures and art forms of the world. What people do that in enslavement are people who are not spiritually enslaved because they had God within them and knew it. And so when I saw this beautiful light, and I've had this experience 2 times, this light communicated without speaking, telepathically. When I talked to my Babalao, he said that's the way the old spirits used to communicate with us. And that's a direct communication because God's a light. When I say God's a light, in my show, the Dr. Obashaka show, I refer to a great Lakota holy man. His name is Fool's Crow. Fool's Crow is a great healer. And at times when he needed help, he would be in the place where the Native Americans go, the sweat lodge, and God would call on him. And his spirit would leave his body. That's called astral projection, where your spirit flies to another place. And his would leave for 2 or 3 days. Most people have this experience called astral projection. I know some of you that are listening to this do, and that's usually in sleep. And it's usually for a few seconds because heaven's outside of space and time. You can learn a lot in milliseconds in heaven that would take you years to learn on earth. But he would commune with God for days and other spirits, and he would go to the highest heaven. There are many heavens. The highest heaven is the heaven of the light. And what did he see? He was asked, what did God look like? He said, God's a great white light. And then he said, Mother Earth is a great green light. He said, the heavens, that is, the sky, is a great blue light. And he communed with them, but especially with God. And so this light that I experience, which all of you have within you, is this light of God. And so in the question of what was the basis of just societies of Africa, and this is what a lot of people don't get when they read the mother principle, over and over again, they'll see the same thing repeated. And they'll say, oh, this is a thesis. That would be a Western idea. That would be a logical point that someone is making that may or may not be true. A hypothesis, a guess. No, this is a vision. And so the light without speaking said, the just societies of Africa were those where all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. That is a reflection of God's mind, which is a totality of knowledge. And in this particular case, a totality of truth within a particular realm. So in Adunaso, knowledge of the world or of the universe, each part is a whole. And so within each part of the Adunaso so-called symbol is within anything is everything. So within you is a whole stellar system. You're a miniature star. And in fact, Seba means bringing the light that is within out. One of the ways you change the system of teaching from the Western system to your own that frees you is instead of basing education on just depositing stuff in people, you bring out what is within. You hear what I'm saying? You open the door of the person's light. That's what the book on Seba, one of the things that it's dealing with. So I'm concluding by saying that piping into God's mind is the highest level of education, the highest level of knowledge. We only get a part of it. And it's dependent upon what your path in life is, because each of us are here for different purposes. But those that aspire to that, that's what it's based on. And why does God open God's mind up to us? Only when we're doing good, only when we want to share for the advancement of humanity. That's why George Washington Carver was the greatest scientist. He didn't care about material things. He just cared about people, his own people first, and then humanity after that. You understand? And he didn't do anything to produce harm for humanity. So piping into God's mind is your best educational experience. That university is inside of you. You hear me? That universe, understand? It's inside of you. It comes through your mother and father who you picked in heaven. You're on a divine course that you chose. It's a question of what you do with it. Every teacher is a student. Every student is a teacher. And one of the books that Brother Imhotep referred to, Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures. This book also involves piping into God's mind. By the way, you can get this through Gumroad. Go to Dr. Obashaka's show, buy it through Gumroad. But that ain't why I'm saying this. This comes again through the teacher learning from the student. And this is a part, and this is one of the two writings that I've done that have piped into God's mind. Brother Ustadi will tell you that the major conclusion of the integration trap generation gap caused by a choice between two cultures is that what's hit Black communities since 1968, various forces that have disorganized Black communities, weakened Black families, created the prison industrial complex, killed off a whole lot of Black leadership, a whole bunch of stuff. This comes from God. These words are piping into God's mind. When I'm asking, so I had a class at State in the 80s, and a young student, probably no more than 18, asked me, if our culture is so strong, why does it have so many holes in it now? And I gave her an answer, and then I came home and realized I didn't have the answer. And I went back and apologized for giving the wrong answer. I didn't feel bad about that. I made a mistake. What I felt bad about was not knowing the answer. You know what I mean? And so I'm sitting in my study one night, actually first, before TV, it was in Richmond, California, and James Baldwin came on, and Baldwin, absolutely brilliant. This was a statement he made that was recorded, and he was dead by the time I heard it. He said, since the late 60s, powerful hostile forces have hit the Black community that we were not prepared for. That clicked. That gave me half the answer, okay? Because I didn't have the answer because I was coming out of these movements, and I'm still organizing in POPLO, different things, Pan-African People's Organization, but I'm able to see the trees, but I'm not able to get the forest in perspective, you know? So I'm sitting in my study one night feeling humble. And it was the same thing with the light that came that led me to this vision of the just society. And again, I see this light. This time it's a smaller light because the question I'm asking about just society is a big question. And by the way, that formula I gave you, That's the key to you transforming your families, your communities, this nation, and the world. That formula for just societies. Because humanity lived under that formula for nearly 200,000 years. See, that isn't just some abstract formula. All the males and females being equally empowered to govern every phase of society, that's the Twa. And the Twa existed in that state for at least 120 to 130,000 years. You hear me? We don't study the Twa. By the way, one of my innovations in history is I brought the Twa in as the foundation. Go look at my shows and look at the series I've done on the Twa and look at the Anu. I study pre-dynastic Kemet. I know the dynastic stuff, but why is it we don't study pre-dynastic? That's where all the creativity occurred. All the philosophy, the language, the spiritual system, all of it was constructed in pre-dynastic Kemet, but we don't study it. And guess who founded that? The Anu, Twa, agrarian Twa. Asar, who was he? Anu. This picture right here, that's an Anu person. This is the oldest proof that the dynastic system, the pharaonic system of Kemet came from Africa. And when Obenga and Sheikh Anta Diop made their argument at UNESCO, that was their strongest argument, right there. They didn't care that they were Anu. They just was proving that they were Black. That's all they cared about. And I had Obenga translate this for me because I didn't trust Petrie's translation. He's supposedly an authority on so-called pre-dynastic Kemet, and Obenga corrected it and pointed out that this little guy here is a great one. His left foot is forward. That means he's royalty. He's got the staff of authority. That means elder. That also means Meru Necher. You know, the staff of authority is speech. And he's come to worship the Pharaoh. On the upper side there, you'll see 3 vertical registers. That's the name of the founders of Kemet. It means great ones, great ones. And they're called Anu. And where did they get that name from? Ani, Asar. He was the first pharaoh of the great ones. And he's come to worship the god, which you see an animal with 2 ears. That's not Horus, that's Set, because in pre-dynastic Kemet, and pre-dynastic is not a correct term, because they had dynasties in ancient Kemet. I've retitled this. I'm not going to tell you what I've retitled it. That's a part of the new historiography. But I'm telling you, pre-dynastic might be behind. They founded this thing. And so what this thing here is showing you is the foundation for your civilization. But in terms of the point that was made by the great writer on the powerful forces that hit our communities since '68, I'm sitting in my study, so I'm asking, so what happened? And I see this light, and what does the light say? A choice between 2 cultures. That's the subtitle of this book. It's saying that the forces that hit our community, deindustrialization, that took jobs away, that did more to break up Black families than anything, because from 1865 to 1968, 75% of our families were 2-parent households. Now only 29% are. The Black family's taken a greater hit between 68 and now than between 1619 and 1968. You hear what I'm saying? Huh? And so there's some new forces that have hit us. And so what has this done? It's caused a choice between 2 cultures. For the first time in our people's history, some of our youth are being put in a position of choosing between our culture and theirs and not even knowing it, because we haven't spent enough time studying our own culture. We study African culture. We should, but we should spend as much time studying African-American culture. So some of our youth think we don't have a culture. You understand? And when they're slipping off into white culture, they don't even know what they're slipping off into. And the 2 biggest slippages is in the area of individualism and materialism. You hear me? Those are the